It's wonderful being here all week. I haven't had a week like this since I can remember, with you and all my colleagues. It's a great pleasure to read to you tonight. I live in Putney, Vermont, where it was 9 below zero this morning. And that's even cold for Putney, just north of Brattleboro. Well, I thought I'd start with a poem about Putney and my orchard here that I live nearby. It's called Dispatch from Putney. All morning, the air whispered things I might forget as I sat listening to the silence beyond the drone of the apple sprayer. A voice so small it spoke like a prayer with instructions for hearing myself as someone else. Put down your pen and pick up a stick. See how smoothly it writes in the dust. What did you think? That you weren't the farthest point from yourself? That silence runs out of ink? This is called Small Black Eye. The sparrow lay stunned but still alive in the periwinkle, a victim of the window that appears as air in the kingdom of birds. I picked her up and placed her wing against my face. As she came around, all the world, sky, grass, trees, shone inside her small black eye that was perfectly still as it stared at me like a stone that could see. Frog. My tongue leapt out of my mouth when I lied to her and hopped away to the stream below the house. Mute then, I started to write the truth. My tongue turned wild in the stream, for which I was glad and unashamed. I listen now from my porch to the complex things it says in the distance about my heart, how hard it is to tell the truth inside my mouth, how much it needs to sing in the dark. About 4 years ago, a very cute little grouse just appeared out of the woods. And while I was raking leaves, and came over and actually sat on my leg. And his name was Randy. And please don't talk to Tom about the grouse, because he wanted to shoot it and eat it, of course. Well, I won't go into all the long stories about Randy, but he stayed with us for 4 years and would garden with us, would take walks with us down to the garden, and show up at Christmas after Thanksgiving, these amazing just appearances during holidays. Talk to us in grouse language. I almost learned it before he died. Anyway, I thought I would write a little dance song for Randy called Grouse Call, like a square dance call. It's called Grouse Call. Do-si-do and say hello to Drummond Bird. Slow it down, then pick it up once and a half and let her go. It's right by wrong, Turn to your left and freeze the dough. Promenade to the field below. It may be the last time, I don't know. Alamand right with Mr. Crow. You can't go to heaven when you carry on so. Yellow rock, red rock, oh by Joe. Dangle now outside the no. Timorous, beastie, beastio. Randy is no longer with us, unfortunately, but he did come around to say goodbye. I didn't realize he was saying goodbye at the time, but I do remember very vividly the last time I saw him. I was very fortunate to get to know Ruth Stone the wonderful Vermont national poet. Before she died, she was bedridden for about 3 years up in Ripton, Vermont, and blind, almost totally blind, but with all her wits about her. And just loved to lie in bed at the end and think about Walter, her husband, who died in 1959. He appears in this poem called Getting Ruth Up. And one of the things I tried to get her to do was to get out of bed, because I could see that her muscles were atrophying, and she was growing weaker and weaker, but she insisted on lying there and thinking about her life, her long, rich life. Getting Ruth Up. For 5 months, I tried to get Ruth out of bed, to sit in her chair, then maybe stand for a while. No, she said, I don't have the strength anymore, and besides, I'm blind. But I had read her poems, and knew how untruthful she was as a liar, and so continued to urge her to rise like the paralytic from the pallet and walk, at least sit up and move around before her muscles quit. And then one day, her granddaughter, Nora, the milliner, came in and asked her to try on one of her hats, a 1940s felt classic with a feather, and wear it as she once did a similar hat 60 years ago when Walter was still alive. And she did, taking her time to swing her legs like arms onto the floor and stand, then walk again as if she could see just where to pose in the parlor and smile for the camera until she could smile no longer, and walked back into her bright, dark room and slept. This next poem is actually pretty true. I worked on a mental health ward for about 5 years after graduate school. And this is a poem about my last day on that job. Happy hour. Has an epigraph here. This is the wristwatch telling the time of the talkative man that lies in the house of Bedlam. Elizabeth Bishop. It was a research ward, so we had to collect blood and urine every day from the patients, and there was a table in the hallway that had all these urinals on it. That's in the poem. ECT is electric shock treatment. NPO is nothing by mouth. I stood behind the table of urinals on evening shift, my last day on the job, and turned this ward into a bar. Patients stared at me from the lounge and almost smiled. Listen up, I said, it's happy hour. All drinks are free. You're crazy as we are, Robert said. Nancy laughed like a chickadee. What'll it be, I asked Rhoda. Rhoda was on an upswing, walking like a penguin down the hall. Give me a screwdriver, she said, to tighten my screws. Coming right up, I said. NPO for ECT, my dear. Better not. I'm getting the hangover that lasts a year. I asked Kenny if he wanted a gin and catatonic. Not funny, suddenly quiet. I was at an altar now instead of a bar. How about a lemonade or sarsaparilla? He stood as still as a mannequin against the wall and stared at something so far away it came too close to him. Alex stopped his pacing in front of the bar and stared at me. I pictured a worm devouring his brain like so many leaves. I'll take a daiquiri, he said, the first thing he'd said in days. I poured him a glass of air, which he took and thanked me for, and drank, then handed back the empty glass. I poured one for me and held it high. L'chaim, I said, to you all. And also to you, Rhoda chimed. We'll miss you, dear. I drank, as Alex did, in a single swig, then put my goblet down on the bar and smelled that smell that was also mine. You know the story about Augustine before he was converted? He was a bad boy. He loved to steal things, and then he bragged about this in Confessions. And one of the things he loved to steal the most was his neighbor's pears. And he wrote about this. For the sake of a laugh, a little sport, I was glad to do harm and anxious to do another. And without thought or profit for myself or retaliation for injuries received. And all because we are ashamed to hold back when others say, come on, let's do it. That's from Confessions. The pear tree that, there was an North African pear tree called a mauve safu that he stole from. Oh, taste and see, I called to the others, for it was foul, and I loved it. The mere idea of stealing them, the mauve safu from my neighbor's tree, a sweet desire my mind's dark tongue was first to savor again and again before my other tongue, so pink and dumb. But this was before I suffered grace, which has no fruit and scrubs the soul of any interest in fallen things except for these confessions that lie exposed like grilled oblations for famished angels. So I shook the branches from top to bottom and tasted a few that weren't as sweet as I thought they'd be, but hung like plunder, enticing me and women's voices to snap them off and stuff my pockets, then slip away undetected to sweeten the swill for the swine back home who roam their sty like former men with a terrible hunger. Tom read a poem about pain the other day, and I was thinking maybe it's just this age we're getting to that we seem so consumed with pain and what it is. I'm not sure. I didn't ask Tom about that, but I was curious about why he wrote about pain. I had a frozen shoulder last year. Do you know what a frozen shoulder is? I had never heard of them before, and then suddenly everyone says, "Yeah, I've had." It's when the joint in your shoulder just freezes up. The joint becomes, the fluid in your joint becomes sticky like glue, and you can't move your shoulder to turn on the light. And it's a result of not using your arm unwittingly, using your other arm much more. And I chopped a lot, or had split a lot of wood, so I think it must have been from that. At any rate, it was terribly painful, and I had to go see this therapist who really tortured me for about 4 months, who seemed to understand my pain, but obviously wasn't experiencing my pain, but did help me. The pain. Quietly, almost secretly, I drove to my therapist for treatment on my frozen shoulder, left my shoes at her door and entered the treatment room on the second floor of the converted house that was her office on Main Street. Once inside, I spoke another language in my native English about the pain I felt, how sharp and dull it was at the same time, how subtly it had grown from a minor injury I never noticed into full-blown adhesive encapsulitis. I lay supine on the table and did as she said, "Breathe into your shoulder, Chard," as if saying my name would empower me to do such a thing. I imagined my shoulder as a lung and grew short of breath as she stretched my arm behind my head, then tried to explain, "I'm creating space in the capsule that's grown cluttered and stuck with the sticky stuff that tissue makes when the joint freezes up." And suddenly, I was an astronaut inside my capsule, with tubes attached to my helmet and visor aglow with the lights of the console in my Apollo rocket. I tried to breathe deeper to lessen the pain, but was grounded there on my practice beer with only my mind for a booster and agony for fuel. I felt the rumble of my slow initial liftoff into the blue that quickens to the black of space where I floated like an embryo, breathing into a tank that soughed and clicked, gazing down at the earth that was my shoulder, spinning around inside its capsule of synovial clouds. I was a visionary in the grip of pain, divining a logic of ridiculous claims. Because the earth was my shoulder, I was the universe with infinite joints. Hardly had I thought this when I felt compelled to repeat it out loud. Because the earth is my shoulder, I am the universe with infinite joints. That's so poetic, she said. You must be a poet. No, I replied. Such thinking is merely an anodyne, which is to say that I believe everyone in pain is on the verge of becoming a poet. Your range of mobility has improved, she said, by 5 degrees, which was the precise distance outside my window between Jupiter and Mars. But I said nothing then. Thank you. I'm going to read a prose poem now that's just about a page. It's a little different. Let me let's get it here. It's called The Police. We were in bed when a knock came at the door. Our bed was next to the front door since we'd given up our only bedroom to our 2 children and partitioned off a part of our large living room with standing bookcases into a second bedroom for us. It was 10:30 on a Sunday night. The knocks resounded hard and quick. I was reading Czesław Miłosz's The Witness of Poetry in preparation for a seminar the next morning. My wife, Rachel, was reading Soren Kierkegaard's The Concept of Irony. Who could that be, I asked, rising naked from bed and putting on my robe. I opened the door to find 2 police officers. Come in, gentlemen, I said. The uniformed men entered and stood over our bed. Rachel pulled the sheet up to her neck. I stood at the end of the bed. We're here because a Mrs. Little called. She said she'd been trying to reach you since yesterday, but the phone's been busy. I picked up the phone by the bed and heard a faint static through the receiver. The phone is broken, I said. We got in this evening, officer, from a weekend trip and haven't used the phone since we got back. Maybe it was the tornado that knocked it out. The policemen stood sheepishly together. Rachel smiled with embarrassment for her mother. I, on the other hand, had a strange impulse to invite the 2 policemen to bed with us, but said instead, would it be too much to ask one of you to call Mrs. Little back to assure her that we're okay? They were kind, Midwestern policemen who said they would be happy to do this. I imagined them climbing into bed with us and falling asleep while we stripped them of their uniforms and put them on ourselves and held their empty weapons to our necks and heads and groins and kissed each other over their veteran bodies while they slept deeply in their exhaustion. We thank these men for their prompt response to my mother-in-law's concern for us. I wanted also to tell them, you have given me a larger sense of myself, as well as assuring me of something I wondered about before, namely the inherent goodness of the police, whose abruptness and armed appearance and lack of tact and laconic style I forgive this time because my mother-in-law was concerned about us and had nowhere else to turn except to you. But I knew also that they didn't expect this and probably wouldn't have understood my sentiment exactly. Strangely, what I think they would have understood probably responded strangely, what I think they would have understood and probably responded to if their duty had not prevented them from getting too close to their public was an invitation to come to bed with us, fully clothed, for it was late, they were tired, and this is what we wanted. I commute to Providence, Rhode Island from Putney every week, and am on the Highway 91 and 146, 2.5-hour Mass Pike. And I have to think of things to help me pass the time. Sometimes I fantasize about being an actor or in a movie in the car. I've never told anyone this, but it's in the poem a little bit. And I'm having, I'm like that bad dream. I'm having a hard time getting back home. It's that last 15 minutes or so. It's snowing often. So I imagine myself a star, a washed-up star of a movie trying to get back home. The star of Interstate. The clouds were curtains that parted onto the show of sky above the scar of 89. Oh, the big blue screen of autumn days and score that featured mainly strings. Oh, the epic something, then nothing that opened as a matinee but played into the night on a single reel inside the room that housed the machine. I drove with one eye open and the other closed. I couldn't tell if the things I was seeing, broken line, blinking light, leaping deer, were live or frozen frames, were on the road or in my mind into which I'd also driven at a dangerous speed. I was bearing down in the passing lane inside the theater of my Chevrolet. I was seeing myself through the lens of a windshield in the opposite lane. I could smell the sky with the windows closed. I could hear her voice from every cloud. Come home, my dear, come home. I believed there was still a way, despite my fame as the man who flies, to return as myself someday and give her the keys. A few more here. Let's see. I had a close friend who unfortunately came down with cancer several years ago. She was a wonderful equestrian, kind person, artist who lived in Putney. We went to see her shortly before she died. She was at home. Her name was Jill Noss, and she had this horse. She used to raise the horses from birth, and they get to know her and of course respond so affectionately toward her. And yet, when she was sick, she wasn't able to raise this one horse from birth, and it turned out to be a little feral and wild and even mean. I wondered what she'd called it, what she'd named it. The poem's called Little Fucker. The pain is less today, said Jill. I gazed out the window at the horses behind the barn. How's that colt doing, I asked. Fresh as ever, said Mary, the hospice worker. Bit me hard on the breast this morning. Sorry, I said, as if it were my duty to apologize for the horse, as if I needed to feel the pain of another to know the calculus of pain, how it cancels out reason and lives on its own as the characteristic of love, how it needles a witness to lie for the sake of truth. I thought of paintings depicting torture, the torture of saints. I thought of Job being whipped by the tongue of God on the bluffs of Uz. I thought of the time I stepped on a nail that pierced right through. The pain, I said to Mary as Jill fell off to sleep, the pain each day in silence. Pain and silence should be her name. And Little Fucker, too. Those three at once, what do you think? Peggy's what Jill calls her, said Mary. So I'm calling her that, too. although I don't feel she's a Peggy. But what can you do? That's the name she comes to now, as if she knew it before she was born. This is a poem about burning brush piles, getting in the fire, or feeling like you're getting right in the midst of the fire, which is shooting up 30 feet high, and then doing it all night because just staying there all night, because if you don't, you're afraid you're going to burn your neighbor's house down. Anyway, so it turned into a little more than that. It's called Chains. I took the chains down to the hardware store to have them sharpened on the grinding wheel. It was the day before the day of rest, so I worked some more when I returned, gathering branches into a pile, starting a fire, tending the flames until they disappeared at dawn. And I went inside to lie with her, the queen of trees, who had waited for me throughout the night, breathing her lullaby now beneath the quilt, emitting the sweet, eternal scent of the future against my stench, leading me with her beauty alone into the dark, where I dreamed of the trees I felled, still falling into that in that slow, intractable way they fall at first, then faster in their swift descent that takes forever, it seems, despite their speed, since in the time between the second the tree begins to fall and the moment it hits the ground, a man has time to write his epitaph on the stone inside his head and lay some flowers as well on the mound that rises up before him like a wave wherever he stands. I think I'll read one more. This is a poem titled Serpent, Witness, Cinematographer. I caught myself watching myself one day watching a movie about a snake. And this very strange sort of double cinema occurred of me watching myself watching this movie, in which I was really hypnotized on thinking and following this snake as it crawled into somebody's house. It was called The Beauty of Snakes, the show was. And this is what came of it. Serpent, Witness, Cinematographer. There are two epigraphs here. And now it is the serpent's turn, Frank O'Hara. And the second one, self-consciousness is theater, Mary Ruefle. He inched inside the almost closed sliding door and glided across the kitchen floor, 6 to 7 feet long, maybe more, and black as a hole in a hole. There's a mouse in here somewhere, he said with a tongue that forked the air. Baby dreamed down the hall of milk-white clouds and singing bears. Mouse stood still beneath the crib and nibbled crumbs. What did he hear as he feasted there in the peace of the house? Unctuous scales on polished tiles, distant drone of neighbors' moor, sough of waves in sound machine. What to fear save the silence, snake belied with double tongue and belly tread, risk and hunger, peace and danger. Calm and heard in the hush he kept as his only cover, while all the world plotted to alarm in the cry of a gull, boom of a jet, honk of a truck. If baby wakes, then mouse escapes into the wall and snake is trapped at the end of the hall. So everything moved in this repose like a dream that was real. Inside a dream, the witness called this afternoon a matinee. Serpent slid as the artist watched behind the lens, moved herself like a Moebius strip with seamless edge from fear to reason, snake to text. I'm fucked for watching him like sex, which he is, if he ends in the way he always does, with a little death, but also more if I just look, then close my eyes. Since this was also now a film with the viewer, me, watching himself, watching it, turning the white linoleum floor into a screen on which these scenes were cast in my mind as well, I felt compelled to flirt with her, the cinematographer, beloved form, internal paramour, me, but also her, that multitude of two we need to see all things. I put my lips to her ear and whispered, the slow, inexorable way his body moves fires your brain to wit as you stand and sit, passing faster now than the stallion ever could in the cinema of self-consciousness. What bliss, she said, when lens and eye coalesce with a chill as cold as the blood of snake, poet, pornographer. I see the union of gizmos and names in his eternal body, from rope and fork to every gauge of electric wire. I see the implement and word as one. I see the cuneiform and hieroglyphs in the dust of every age. I hear music in the pit of my acoustic head, a slow diminuendo for strings and drums. I would kiss you now if your lips weren't mine. I would call you my soul, then write to you in the present as if it were the past. I mind how once we lay such a transparent summer morning. Baby sighed when Snake attacked beneath the crib, turned his head and kicked a leg, but stayed asleep. Snakes can't move in reverse, you said, but when they do egress in scoots and whips, they speak beneath their long, soft breath. Stillness is sleep. Stillness is absence. Stillness is prayer. Stillness is peace. Silence, balance is there. You waved like Eurydice at the door that was also my head. Did you see, my dear? You asked, then disappeared into the dark. What? Where now to look? And then your voice in your absence said, this is what the present did. Get it down in your sacred book. Sing with the power to stir the trees. The genius of snakes lies in their ear for the rustle of feet, hum of mind, which their beauty follows. Thank you.